Welcome to Coffee with Mr. IoT, a weekly chat with Robert Schmidt, Deloitte's chief futurist, and the builders, dreamers, founders, and wild children of the IoT universe. This podcast can also be viewed on the Coffee with Mr. IoT YouTube channel.
Hello, my name is Robert Schmidt. I'm Deloitte's chief futurist, also known as Mr. IoT. Today on my coffee chat, I have my boss, Adam Mussomeli, who leads our supply chain and network operations practice. So I better do a good job today. No, welcome, Adam. It's great to have you. We've talked about having you on the show for a few times. I'm actually super excited to be here with you. How are you doing? How is the family doing? Everybody healthy and good?
I'm doing great, Robert, and so good to see you again, and thanks for having me. I know we've worked through some scheduling challenges, so it's great to be here.
Yeah, it's sort of a wild time with scheduling, I find. In some ways I have a lot more time, and somehow it's all filled up. I don't know. How are you doing with scheduling? Is it sort of like even wilder for you?
Well, I think we're probably sharing the same world on this. I find that there is no shortage of things to do. And in today's world, where we're staying at home, right? I don't have buffers anymore between meetings, right? So I always have to schedule in things like, hey, I actually got to go get food to eat, or I want to refill my coffee, or something like that. It's just one thing after the other.
I have once in a while, I text my wife, which she's next door, right? And I text her and say, would you mind bringing me something to eat so I don't get hangry? And then she texts me back, can I come in now? Am I on video? So we have these conversations. It's pretty fun. Yeah. Adam, you've been with Deloitte for a long, long time. You've been with us 23 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, since 97. It's been a while.
So give us a little bit about your journey. I'd love to. I mean, I know part of it, but I'd love to hear about it. I know how people like to hear. What's a 23-year-long journey like at Deloitte?
Well, it's been a great journey, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. But it's kind of an unintentional journey. I like to call myself the accidental consultant. I didn't grow up with anybody that was a consultant anywhere, a friend of the family or anything like that. I started my career really in the military, and in business school, I heard about things like consulting, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. I actually went into industry and worked there for a number of years, doing supply chain and operational jobs. And then friends of mine that had joined Deloitte just sought me out, said, hey, listen, there's a lot of interesting work here. We think you'd like it. We think you'd be good at it. And, 23 years ago, I was single. So I thought, why not? I'll do it. It was the classic, going into consulting plan. I'll do it for 2 years, right? And we'll see what happens. And 2 years that were great, turned into 3, turned into 4. And I liked the work I was doing. And maybe I was a little bit fortunate because I knew I had done supply chain and operations work before I joined the firm. I knew that's what I wanted to do. Now I was doing it in a consulting setting. So that probably helped. But just love the work, love the clients, love the people, and ultimately this is the career now, right?
Yeah, this is how I came to the US. I'm gonna be here for 2 years and then I go back. I ended up going back for a year to Austria 10 years later, and people asked me, "What are you doing here?" So it was kind of funny. So Adam, supply chain network operations. It's such a topic right now with, what does supply chain mean? What's going on? Tell us a little bit how we experience this, and not so much from what's the business like, but sort of topical. What's coming up now? What's changed the last couple of months, and how you think about supply chain?
Yeah. So, it's on one hand, when I think about the world of supply chain, it's very simple. Right. At the end of the day, in any supply chain, you plan the movement and conversion of materials, right? And then you do it. Whether you're in a make to stock or make to order supply chain, there's always some element to that, figuring out exactly where the planning stops and the execution begins. And that's been forever true, right? What's super interesting is how we do that, and the capabilities by which we do that have been changing fairly dramatically, certainly over the past 10 years, increasingly so over the past 5. And now, as we look at the issues our clients are facing in pretty much any sector, increasingly so, right? So if we look at just planning itself, and let's say understanding something like demand for some good or service, right? If we were having this discussion 3 years ago, we'd probably be thinking more along the lines of traditional demand planning, which would look at several years worth of history, maybe run it through an algorithm or two. If we're really fancy, maybe we had 3 or 4 different algorithms to look at, project forward a curve, and from there do some sort of blowout into SKUs and figure out how to start to move the materials based on that demand. But as we move forward to today, I think increasingly, your world of IoT is much more important. So what can we find out about what's happening right now and what just happened, and how does that influence demand and get us into more of a demand sensing world? So that's a major turn. And then I think the other thing that's pretty safe to say, at least over the foreseeable year or two, the past 2 years aren't going to be really good at predicting what's happening over the next 2 years, right? The world has changed a lot. So this notion of just looking at, 2 or 3 years of history and projecting it forward and working from that starting point, probably not the way to go, right? So things are changing pretty rapidly.
You mentioned you went military, and I gotta put a plug in there. I did a little research and I looked at your Facebook page, and there was, if anybody ever wants to see super young Adam, you have a profile picture in your military uniform, which was great to see. I was curious. I find the military is one of those that has a very complicated supply chain. And I've also found that working with people that come out of the military, there's so much value that cross correlates between them. I remember we hire people from there, and I remember Activision hire people from there actively. What did you bring from there? Was there anything in particular that you can think back about that?
Yeah, there were a couple things. I mean, several things, quite frankly. But I'll share two that I found particularly important as models to think about as we think about effectiveness and efficiency in any supply chain setting. One is just the way either our own military or any military thinks about organization and how it gets things done and the flow of information through it, and the different operating models and network models that either enable or inhibit that, right? And how you think about, well, what should really be done, call it more at the center versus in a dispersed sort of nature, and what sort of decision making is local versus what sort of decision making is not. So that's always been a really important piece of what I've taken out of the military in terms of applicability to supply chain. The other piece is the whole notion of resource planning, right? You mentioned the big supply chains the military has, and a lot of times when we think about supply chains, we understandably think about some form of material, be it a finished product or an asset we're moving around or whatever it may be. The reality is the military moves around enormous amounts of people all the time. It's got to be maybe the largest resource planning organization on the planet. And that's just a supply chain of people. So how do you do that? And how do you figure out how to do that effectively and efficiently such that, where you need those resources at a particular point in time, standard supply chain solve, right? Problem to solve, you can do it. And for our military on a global basis.
One of the terms you coined was digital supply networks, and sort of like how it's not really a chain anymore, but it's a network. And, I love how sensors help us map out that network, help us optimize that network. Talk a little bit about what that mind shift meant for you when you thought of this, where did it came from, and where do you see it? And just talk a little bit about it, because I think it's such an important aspect of where we're going with this.
Yeah, I think when I think about digital supply networks and, the underlying premise of really what that means, and to your point, what that means is understanding enough about what's needed as an outcome from that network. So customer service level, whatever it is, and the need to understand in order to meet that outcome, what's happening labor, material wise, resource wise across that entire network and the decisions being made. That's the fundamental premise, is being able to do that on a network basis. That's what DSN is all about. And the way we got there, to the point of your question, was we kept thinking about looking at history and our collective experience across our team, right, and what we do, and our clients' experiences, how inevitably there was always one more piece of information beyond where we sat in a supply chain that was helpful to us in making a decision, right? So if I was in a manufacturing plant, and we wanted to go ahead and we're trying to run production to meet a customer request, well, it was helpful to understand what was happening in another manufacturing plant. And it was helpful to understand what were inventory positions at different points of the network, be it either inbound raw materials or outbound finished goods, and understanding where they were staged and figuring out what that meant to expedite. And so the more we talked it through as we were thinking about how relatively better supply chain decisions were made, the more we came to the realization that, this wasn't a node solve if we wanted to dynamically optimize. It wasn't even a chain solve. It really was this network solve. And ultimately, because the technology started to allow for that a couple of years ago, largely what we call digital technology, it became digital supply networks.
So I wouldn't be true to my title and my passion, which is thinking about the future, what's coming. I just had a conversation today with our team that's doing tech trends. And so they asked me about where's this going. And, I talked about there's this concept of batteryless computers, right?
Yeah.
What does it take to stick a computer on every single piece of moving product, and sort of like think about what could that mean for me as a consumer, even not just like in the supply chain, which is a part of it, but sort of like the consumer side of things, all the way from the product being made to here, if I know where it is all the time, what temperature it's at, how it's being handled, and so forth. So that gets me super sort of like pumped up, and I can get very geeky on this. What are the things that you're looking forward to? What are sort of like some of the things, and it might not be technology, it might be processes, it might be people changes that you're looking forward to in the future? What are you missing or something like that?
Well, I'm thinking a lot about two things. One is the technical changes that you very accurately mentioned here, right? And how those perhaps change the point at which decisions can be made, as well as how the decision is being made. Is it the person? Is it now a machine? Is it a person plus a machine making a decision? So that's one aspect I'm looking quite hard at. And then two, what that means for the definition of supply chain, right? Classically, for somebody like me that grew up in supply chain kind of started when your supplier shipped you materials. If you were thinking maybe more broadly, you'd go back and you'd include a couple tiers of suppliers in your supply chain, and kind of ended when you ship the material to your customer. That's not really the case anymore, right? We've already kind of had a dialogue around the whole network play here beyond just a chain, but also if these products continue to, I'll use the term, be alive in some way, shape, or form, and
I love that term.
continue use and storage and experience, and you can loop that back into your own supply chain and better understand, well, how do you serve that market, and what capabilities do you need, and what does that mean for how you think about procurement, how you think about planning, and how you think about manufacturing, etc. The definition of what supply chain is changes fairly significantly, inclusive of who's even managing the supply chain moving forward, right? You have to move to the side PII and other concerns like that, right? But just conceptually thinking about what a supply chain is as technology continues to push forward the boundaries of the time and place and type of decision we can make is of great interest to me.
What I find fascinating about this is that if you think of your product just going to a warehouse, a retailer, a distributor, the customer changes, right? At first you sell it to them. Now you're actually really connecting with the end customer. And, me as an end customer, what I know is I have expectations now with connected products. And so that's a whole new world to live in. And it's an exciting world to live in. So I want to shift to sort of like two personal questions that I have for you. One, how has technology impacted you personally? And what comes with that is I always like to know how enabled technically IoT wise, how connected is your home? What do your kids run that, or vice versa? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so it's actually affected us pretty dramatically in a couple different ways. First of all, it's allowed us to become closer as a family. So just a simple, straightforward example. Uh, Before we were able to enjoy tablet computing, you know, because we've always done some amount of shopping online and kids were researching stuff for school, etc., we would often find that we were in different rooms, right? So somebody would be using the office computer, somebody might be using something in the kitchen, but we were a little bit separated. And because of the whole mobile revolution that's happened, I'll just sit in the living room, right? So we find that we can do a bunch of these different things, perhaps separate activities at different points in time, but together, right? And so that's been an interesting finding. The other thing is just watching my kids grow, and they're 17 and 15 now, so they really grew up through this wave. It's been fascinating to me to observe how this is just part of their lives, and sometimes we use the term digital native, or we use that phrase. I, I think it's more than that, right? It's so a part of how they think about and interact with the world that to them, it's no longer work or even play. It's just living, right? So I have one of my sons is really into technology, and he's doing a bunch of different programming and stuff. But when I did it, or I saw other kids in the family that came along before my son do it, it became a little bit of a task and something that they would allocate time to. um, for my son, it's just like bouncing a ball on the ground. Of course, he would do this because it's part of, the world, and he wants to do something that he views as cool. And just like bouncing a ball on the ground or off a wall, like I did when I was a kid, he's programming because that gets him to whatever the outcome is he wants to enjoy at that particular point in time. So interesting symbiosis there.
So Adam, any closing thoughts, any sort of things you want to send us off with? I appreciate the time. What shall we look out for?
Well, what I think about a lot today is there's significant change across multiple dimensions. Right now, where we sit, certainly the pandemic is generating a bunch of change, which just adds to, I think, the ongoing technical change. Earlier, you talked about, batteryless computing systems, so different forms of energy. There's a lot out there, and I think that, what we've experienced is people can look at that and it's so different and it's happening so fast that it can cause concern. And certainly we have to be thoughtful about what we do moving forward. It's always good to make prudent decisions with as much information as you have. But I think if you look at the history, especially the recent history, we find that the era we're moving into is generating more good, more wealth, more prosperity, better standards for everybody across most dimensions than not. And so, what I think is be excited. The world my kids are going to live in is probably better than the world that, we've been living in, and, on and on and on. So I look forward to the future with quite a bit of excitement versus anxiety.
Adam, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for having me as your chief futurist. And with that, I want to say thank you for watching another episode of Coffee with Mr. IoT.
Thanks for listening to Coffee with Mr. IoT. To subscribe or to listen to more episodes, search for Coffee with Mr. IoT in your favorite podcatcher, or find us online at deloitte.com/us/coffee with Mr. IoT. To watch the video version of our show, go to YouTube and search Coffee with Mr. IoT.